and there was a plan. And of course, that continues because our new state deputy has a plan as well. He's going to share that with you right now. Brother Bruce Poulin.
Thank you, Earl. And of course, the first thing that we do is turn off the light because there won't be a red light for the state deputy. There you go. That's the only time I can put my foot down because that doesn't work at home. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, David, when you did all the roll call, we missed the Dean of DDs and MIOs here today. And 93 years young, 38 years within the Knights of Columbus. Ben, will stand up. And take a bow here. God love you. So just so you know, Ben, at one point came up to me and he said, you know, Bruce, I'm just getting up in age and I just don't have the energy anymore, and I want to be there and I can't, and I just can't be a DD or an MIO, and it pains me, but it's time to let someone else run with it. And I said, okay, all right, Ben. And then a week later he phoned and he said, I hear you have this DD workshop in Ottawa at the Westin. Can I come to it? so here you are, and we love you for it, and thank you very much for your interest in the Knights. And that's just kind of a symbol of some of the people that we have in terms of our team and our dedication. So it's a great feeling to have that kind of respect and enthusiasm. And then of course, you know, we were talking about traditions, and one of the traditions I have is to pick on Stephen Maloney because Stephen and I are hunting buddies. So where's Stephen? There you are. Okay, here we go. So as you know, Stephen and I, we've gone hunting many a time, and Steve's been very kind to me and given me sort of some tips about to be a successful hunter. So the first thing he told me is that if ever you are lost, the first thing you need to do is build a shelter, because the CRA tax collector will find you. Then the second thing he told me is that if you ever find yourself being attacked by a bear, use pepper spray to make the bear mad. And I'm looking a little confused, and I said, okay. And he said, you're going to die anyway, but an angry bear will kill you faster. So thanks, Steve, for helping me out with some hunting tips there. So, my presentation is relatively short, because I know we're already crunched for time, and I did promise Jerry that if I have any time left over, I would cede it to you, and then, of course, we're not going to make that into a habit, but there is that commitment. So the first thing is talking about demographics, and what I'm trying to do is portray sort of the context in which we're working. And in Canada, the US, Australia, and New Zealand, we have a particularly interesting demographic makeup, and demographics actually is an insurance thing. And they were the first ones to come up with it because when they were doing life insurance, they wanted to sort of average out births, deaths, and how they could gauge their insurance policies and rates. So we know that in human society, there's stages of behavior. And we could go over this, but I think we all acknowledge that when you're from 0 to 20 years old, you're developing your own identity, you're leaving the house, you're doing your thing, and that tends to be when at some point people are becoming independent and not necessarily community-oriented. And then when they're between the ages of 20 and 40, relationships and intimacy. And this is where, you know, you got the teenager buying a sports car, and then you got the next level, when you're hitting the 20 to 40, you got the minivan, and then at some point, you know, if you're successful, when you're the 40 to 65, you're buying the two-seater Porsche, or the Ferrari. Right, Don? So we know that that's what happens in society. And that's just the way it's going to go. And we can fight it. We can try to, you know, be a salmon going upstream, or we can acknowledge that and work with it. Next slide. So what happens is in society they take and they targeted these groups. So we know that fear sells books and it controls agencies, and we've got conspiracy theories all out there. We need to get away from all that media hype and people telling us, you know, you should be looking left, when we know that the actual demographics and the behavioral conduct is going in another direction. So what does that mean? If we have age groups that have certain behavior and we ignore the media that's trying to tell us one thing and it's kind of in a round peg in a square hole, what does that mean? in terms of demographics? Well, the example is from 1901 to 1926, we had the greatest generation. And what happened was, population birth was relatively constant. World War I came along, Spanish flu came along, and birth rates plummeted. And what happened when the birth rate plummeted was that it created an anomaly of the 1901 to 1926. They had more children than their successor generations because of the war and because of the Spanish flu. And I'm being very generic here, very average, but that meant that that group was bigger than any other group in society, which meant that if they're the larger population in a democracy, that group that has those behavioral characteristics will vote and act in a certain way. That group, the greatest generation, ended up serving in World War II, and that generation ended up having the baby boomers. And that group, again, had a lot of sway in our society. So the baby boomers came along after, and the baby, same thing. Instead of there being a decline in successive generations, we actually had a huge outpouring because we had World War II just ended. Everybody had a job. Financially, North America was doing extremely well, so they had more kids. So that group in the 60s and 70s, when they were going through the behavior, right, we talked about, you know, we all know it, kids from 0 to 20 and then moving on, how they behave. They end up having an undue influence on society. And much like the greatest generation in the 1950s, it was actually the golden age of the Catholic Church in North America. Because they came back, they got married, they had kids, and they ended up coming back to the church. The baby boomers did the same thing in the 1980s. They came back. Evangelicals, churches, huge increase, and even Catholic churches also saw a rise and increase, both in terms of population, domestic, but also through immigration. So what I'm suggesting to you, and why am I talking about those two generations, is because now we know there's a new, unusual cohort in our population, and that is the millennials from, as you can see there. They constitute right now 21% of our population. They are going through the 0 to 20, 20 to 40, and what I'm suggesting to you, particularly in Canada, because we have a demographic makeup that's particularly well suited to this presentation, is that we are actually on the cusp of a return to the church, just like we saw with the greatest generation and we saw with the baby boomers. So it's an interesting dilemma because that's not what the media is telling us. They're telling us that it's over, it's done. And if you went and did a little bit of research in the 1920s and 30s, you would hear the same stories about it's the end of Catholicism, time to move on, who's turning off the lights and who's locking the door. And we're at that same discussion now. And as we've seen in the other two previous generations, there's actually been a return to the church. So I'm suggesting, once again, that we're facing that same prospect, and the fact that we had younger generations, and Mark was talking about that, wanting to return because of faith, right, and their revival and their beliefs. And I've been, and I go to St. Clement's, the Latin Mass, and I'll tell you, the pews are full. Families, kids everywhere, it's packed. So there is that return, and I think we're on the cusp of that. Next slide. So this is a lot of numbers. And I'm an artsman, I'm not an engineer, but I know Marcel is probably going to start doing the analysis and see if I did the math right. But essentially what I'm saying there is that Quebec's membership has been declining steadily, and I know I'm going to get Danielle excited here, Danielle Duchamp, because he's the Supreme Director from Quebec and he's taking notes. Their membership is declining. Ontario's membership has either increased, stabilized, and I hope in the next year, maybe two, will increase as well. So what does that mean? That means that somewhere around our generation, in terms of this state board, one of these state deputies will see the day that we will have one more member than Quebec. And that's when I have that bottle of champagne ready for that council that has that one. No, Daniel's already getting excited. But there will come a time, and it'll be in our lifetime that we will see that. And I'm very confident that if we do this right and we adopt this plan, and of course, that leads me to a perfect segue as to why there's this plan that I call Quebec Plus One. And that's the strategic action plan that we've worked on in Cornwall with all the directors, and it's the plan that we are going to explain to you in the next day and a half. How do we do our job so that at some point, not in my term, that's okay, because it's a long-term vision. This is about a team effort and for the good of the order in Ontario, in some friendly competition with Quebec. How do we get to the Quebec +1 when we have that one more member in the name? And I want to be there for that. So for the next 2 days, you'll be hearing from our directors about how we'll take the longer, more sustainable view and be ready to support the growth that will eventually happen with the millennials, as I just explained. It's hard to tell people that you need to change everything today. I get it. Because we anticipate a massive influx of new members that will happen in the next few years down the road. That's my call to action for you and my prediction. And I have, some numbers at least I think justifying my claim. I know it's hard to initiate dynamic change into a rigid culture with highly structured people, and what we need to do is, instead of providing more training and more mentoring to the DDs, we have worked around them. In the past, we've adopted the Supreme Train-the-Trainer programs, we've had special two-man recruiting teams, we've had districts that have been less vacant, there's been insufficient training, and the list goes on. The result was, I'm arguing, short-sighted, because we may have focused on making Circle of Honor 4 times in the last 6 years, but the reality is that we are sitting on the most comfortable deck chair on the Titanic, unless we think more strategically, long-term, and also become more innovative. So how do we create a culture that is receptive to change, which is in fact what Mark was talking about earlier, motivation and inspiring. When I attended the state deputy organizational meeting this past June, we were told that we needed to start right away. And you heard about fast track, start fast. 1 July, let's go. So here's what we did in anticipation of the 1st of July. With an effective date of 1 July 2023, we had already replaced, either through retirement or we moved on and we asked other people to fill the position, but we actually replaced 40% of the incumbent district deputies. Likewise, we replaced 25% of the MIOs. And what I'm suggesting is that with that replacement, what we have in fact is created potential for a lot of new, innovative ideas. Jerry Hayes will be talking about in much greater detail about that. Next, we created a membership monthly growth calendar where all the MIOs and their respective district deputies are going to be held accountable for reporting on the programs. It's all about programs being run in their area. And our program director, Daniela Sal, will speak on this as well later. Every district deputy will be given the power, authority, and opportunity to be transformational leaders. This is my call to you, to be transformational leaders in their own right. You'll be hearing more about that under the heading of the membership with Vincent and Deb Mangalak, Paul Johnson, Dennis Keitley, and Denis Belanger. But let me give you 3 teasers. Effective 1 July 2023, no state board officer or director will be eligible for state board awards like Recruiter of the Year. They'll not be getting the leather jackets and watches. All credit will be awarded to either the DD, the Grand Knight, and or the members. Second, the Recruit for Rewards program that David Fisher and the immediate past state deputy Marcel Lemon had instituted last year will continue, and it will be cumulative. In other words, the credits and points received last year will be applied and continued for this year. Third, effective July 1st, the district deputies who qualify for the Supreme $200 new council incentive, they will be getting the money. No director, board officer will qualify. It's all about you and the Grand Knights and the membership. Finally, in accordance with our strategic action plan, we'll emphasize programs as the gateway to membership. And therefore, you'll be hearing from our 4 pillar directors, Jaime Lebac, Joseph Remedios, and Alex Schanberg, and Danielle Mainville later today, about these programs and how we can help our councils. Remember, councils recruit 78% of all new members, and Supreme expects us to reach a minimum of 82-star councils this year. Only well-run programs will meet and exceed that requirement. As I look across the room, I can already sense there's a little bit of bewilderment, and some of you are probably thinking this is a lot of change, perhaps even too much change. And I suppose we could look back to the good old days, way back when magazines in the dentist's waiting room were new. Still others will suggest that we need to scale back operations because membership dues are down. Cut back, cut down, cut out programs like so many councils are doing right now. You can be like the farmer who had 2 windmills but tore one down because he didn't think there was enough wind for both of them. But the third and final option, and this is the one of my administration, will be following is based on a vision of sustainable growth. I know our expectations are low right now. Pews are empty. Recruiting councils is down. It's the summer, blah, blah. But there are 2 things that play in our favor. There are demographics, which I covered earlier, which I just covered, and there's the strategic action plan, which will be covered in greater detail in the next 2 days. As state board officers, directors, MIOs, and district deputies, you have chosen not to fit in. You have chosen to stand out. And it's my intention and guidance that this workshop and the on-the-job training that will follow for the next 6 months will give you the tools you will need to succeed as leaders and help Catholic men and boys make society a better place for their families to live freely in a more prosperous and healthy tomorrow. The world needs fixing. It needs hope. It needs the Knights of Columbus. And more importantly, it needs you as the leadership of this organization. By the time you leave here, I want you to go out to every council meeting, meet with our members, and the first 4 words that I should hear from your mouth, and that's what they should be hearing, is, how can I help? It should become the cornerstone of how you engage the disenfranchised members and increase membership. Because at the end of the day, it's never about how much you know, because you will never know everything. It's all about how much you care. Just remember this. Amateurs built the Ark, professionals built the Titanic. So I'm very confident that we can do this. We're not trying to get people to join the Knights of Columbus to make the Knights more powerful, richer, or just bigger. That's not what we're about. We are providing a service to Catholic men and boys to help make society into a better place for their families. And that's where our forte comes into play. And I look forward to hearing your comments, and I look forward and I hope you will enjoy the series of presentations you'll be receiving and listening to for the next day and a half as much as we have putting them together. Viva Jesus.